Weezer fans, I'm so sorry for what I'm about to say. Coming into Weezer's new album, Everything Will Be Alright in the End. I made the mistake of coming into Weezer's Everything Will Be Alright in the End by listening to their back catalog. Now, anybody who talks about Weezer has to mention the Blue Album. They have to mention Pinkerton, because these were two of the best albums in the 90s. They had the perfect amount of emotion and poppy melody, and as the legend goes, you know, Pinkerton did not do very well with the critics or with the audience at the time, and the singer, songwriter, frontman, Rivers Cuomo kind of went off to college, really spent time away from Weezer for a while, and when he came back back with the Green Album, but something was different. Something was very different about this Weezer. It did not sound like the same kind of Weezer, and I think that what happened is that Rivers Cuomo spilled his guts out on that record, and people didn't like it, and he took it personally, and so whenever he went off away from Weezer, I think that he kind of sealed himself off and vowed to never really let his emotional guard down again. Because with the Green Album and with Maladroit, even though these albums are okay, they don't go to the same kind of brutal, harsh emotional depths that Pinkerton does, or even the Blue Album. So those albums are good, but then, you know, there was the Red Album, and there was Raditude, and I think most people don't really like those albums. And then they had Hurley, and Hurley seemed to be a step in the right direction. And now I know it's not fair to necessarily expect Weezer to go back to the Blue Album. I'm sure that Rivers Cuomo isn't as emotional a young lad as he was back then, but I just wish that there was some kind of emotion on Everything Will Be Alright in the end. It kind of feels like Weezer is accepting this role as a kind of cool geek rock party band, and a lot of their music is just straightforward and streamlined and polished and very well produced, but I don't get anything out of it. I mean, take the lead single from this album, for example, Back to the Shack. Back to the Shack, I guess it's kind of catchy, but, you know, whenever you really look at the lyrics, Weezer is really railing against today's pop culture and saying, let's go back. Let's go back to 1994 when they made good music and there wasn't all these stupid singing contests and singing shows. But even though they say let's go back to 1994, which was when the Blue Album came out, but they really make no attempt to go back there. This album sounds just like the natural progression from Hurley, where you had this really streamlined, almost emotionless, kids bop ready rock and roll. And I know that might be harsh, but I think that Weezer is being a little disingenuous with what they're doing, because on one hand, it really feels like they're trying to rally against pop culture. So they're singing songs like Back to the Shack, which is basically accusing pop culture of, you know, being heartless and emotionless and nothing but style. You know, and then that song Beverly Hills that came out several years ago is the exact same thing. It's just trying to satirize today's music scene. So they want to be the underdogs. So they want to be a band that are above the same kind of things that pop culture today falls into. And they see themselves as outside that system. They see themselves as outside that pop culture system. But I think that they're actually striving to be in it. They're, like, there's no rough edges to their music. Even though they try to rail against it, they're falling right into it by making this very streamlined, very polished, rock music that feels like it was made to be played on the radio. But even if you look back at the Blue Album, some of that was still there. Not only was the emotion there, but they had there was still some rough edges to their music that gave them grit, and there's none of that grit here. And, you know, I think that if this album came from a band that wasn't Weezer, that we had never heard of before, I think that it would go largely ignored. I do think that there are a few tracks on here that are actually pretty good. I think that The British Are Coming are pretty good, which is the second single off of this album. I think that's pretty catchy, and that's pretty good. But I really like Cleopatra, and Cleopatra is probably one of the more experimental cuts off this album. It really finds the band kind of playing around with melody and playing around with its own sound. So it doesn't just sound like super compressed, playing for a solid 3 minutes and then getting out of there. So I think that this is a little limp, it's a little toothless, and I think that if you consider what this band is capable of, it's a disappointment. Now, I know a lot of people do love this album, but I think that it doesn't live up to its potential. 4.0 out of 10. I'm so sorry, Weezer guys. I might be wrong. But let me know what you think I should review next. If you thought this review was helpful, give me a thumbs up or subscribe to this channel. Or better yet, check out earbuddy.net where you can find a lot of reviews, previews, interviews, and news that are just like this. I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.